Certainly. Here's Section 1, 6,000 words, of your HFY script titled The Galactic Rule. Never set foot on Earth, here's why. Written in a direct, narration-optimized style for a faceless YouTube video, with no repeated content, no scene directions, and no fluff. Every word pushes the story forward, while honoring the tone and principles of high-quality HFY. In the vast records of the Galactic Concord, among countless treaties and interspecies laws, one rule stands above all others in absolute severity. No ship, no probe, no sentient being of any kind is to enter the Sol system. The directive does not allow interpretation. It is not subject to debate. It is enforced not by patrols, but by the weight of ancient fear. There are star systems consumed by supernovae, others crawling with hostile biomes, and even regions warped by temporal instability. But none of these are forbidden. Only one blue-green world holds that distinction: Earth. The rule was drafted after the last contact war, but its origins stretch deeper, into centuries obscured by secrecy and redacted files. Records indicate Earth was once a standard class, for a death world, dangerous but far from unique. It had oxygen-rich atmosphere, fluctuating temperatures, apex predators, and seismic instability. But it wasn't the environment that terrified the galaxy. It was the humans. Humanity entered the galactic stage late. They arrived battered, fractured, and primitive compared to their peers. Their first jump-capable vessel barely passed stability metrics. Their representatives lacked neural links, used primitive vocal communication, and radiated unchecked emotional energy. They weren't feared because they were powerful. They were feared because they didn't act like any known species. In the early cycles of contact, humans surprised diplomatic envoys with reckless honesty and terrifying calm under pressure. They formed trade deals in the same breath. They threatened military action. They debated as if war was a logical next step, not a last resort. And when war did come, they waged it like nothing the galaxy had seen. Other species fought to win. Humans fought not to lose. When cornered, they didn't surrender, they detonated. When outmatched, they sabotaged their own vessels to become kinetic weapons. When isolated, they used their biology to survive environments even machines failed in. The galaxy didn't understand them. And worse, they didn't understand themselves. The Archive of Broken Worlds lists over 37 planetary conflicts where humans were involved, and only 4 where they initiated aggression. But in all 37, the aftermath was the same: silence, ruin, and an unspoken agreement among survivors to never provoke them again. One report described a small human outpost under siege by a superior fleet. The siege lasted 2 weeks. Then the human commander detonated the moon orbiting the planet. The shockwave eradicated both sides. No winners, no survivors, just an echo. That echo reverberated to the halls of every major civilization. Human strategy didn't revolve around territory or even victory. It revolved around persistence. Suffering was a tool. Death was a resource. Pain was a familiar companion. But even that wasn't enough to justify the total quarantine of Earth. Something changed. Something shifted in the last decades of their open contact. Reports became scarce. Human fleets withdrew. Embassies closed. Trade ceased. Earth fell quiet. Not weak, not conquered, just silent. The last signal received from the Sol system was a wideband transmission. "We are going home. Do not follow." Some believed they had destroyed themselves. Others believed they had transcended. But most agreed on one truth: Earth was no longer safe to approach. Not because of war, but because no one knew what they would find. One of the last documented missions to Earth was led by a coalition of scientists from the Andorak Triumvirate. They approached with caution, deployed drones, and recorded every movement. The mission lasted 42 minutes. Then the feed turned to static. When the retrieval vessel arrived months later, it found only the central core of the science ship drifting, hull melted, with no biological traces remaining. The Council labeled the incident Anomaly XC Prime. The name was quickly forgotten, but the decision that followed wasn't. Earth was closed. By unanimous vote. No one dissented. Not the trade guilds, not the war clans, not even the species that viewed humans as long-lost siblings. The rule was formalized into the Interstellar Accord under Directive 1. The fear was not superstition. It was survival. There were no known cases of anyone returning from Earth, not just living, but even transmitting. Every expedition ended in silence. Not death, silence. And that was worse. What made Earth different wasn't its location or climate. It was a human's ability to reshape the psychological terrain of the galaxy. Other species learned to avoid pain. Humans endured it. Others advanced cautiously. Humans leapt forward, failing, bleeding, learning faster than anyone else. Their progress wasn't linear. It was explosive, chaotic, unregulated. They discovered technologies they didn't fully understand and used them anyway. One council report classified humanity as hyperadaptive anomalies with recursion-based aggression reflexes. No one quite knew what that meant, but the analyst who coined the term reportedly suffered a neural breakdown after reviewing human combat logs. His final entry simply read, "They enjoy it." There was once a story told in the Outer Rings of a planet where the atmosphere howled with the screams of its past, where the grass grew over cities and monuments stood not to peace, but to resistance, where the soil remembered everything. That story wasn't fiction. That planet was Earth. Even a human's biology seemed to defy standard evolutionary logic. Bipedal, fragile, soft-skinned, yet they thrived in Arctic cold, desert heat, and jungle disease zones. Their immune systems adapted within days. Their minds endured long-term trauma without full collapse. Some species went extinct after losing a single colony. Humans lost worlds and came back angrier. After the final withdrawal, Earth became more than a place. It became a symbol, a warning, a taboo etched into cultural memory. Younglings of a dozen species were taught not to speak the name aloud. Explorers were taught to fear the black sector beyond the Centauri Veil. Even automated systems were coded to divert around the soul coordinates. But with every generation, fear erodes, and curiosity rises. Some have begun to question the rule. They wonder if the stories were exaggerated, if the silence is simply failure of old tech, if humanity really was as terrifying as the myths suggest. Forbidden nature of Earth bred not only silence, but obsession. The minds of those who governed learned to fear it. The minds of those who wandered learned to crave it. For every diplomat who argued for continued restriction, 1,000 explorers dreamed of becoming the one to break the rule and survive. Curiosity was a fire, and Earth was the spark hidden beneath the galactic floorboards. Within the deep archive vault of the Concorde's third moon, sealed documents are occasionally decrypted for internal review. One such document, labeled only as Chrono Relic 17, contained excerpts from the last diplomatic mission to Earth. The log described an unarmed vessel, 5 crew members, and a simple objective: present the Accord's final offer for integration. The mission never returned. No distress signal. No escape pod. Just one final entry broadcast moments before they cross Sol's heliopause. They are awake. Interpretation of that phrase has consumed entire divisions of military think tanks. What does awake mean in the context of a species already capable of interstellar travel? Theories range from biological evolution to the crossing of some philosophical or cognitive boundary. Whatever the truth, the mission's loss solidified the idea that humanity wasn't just absent. They were altered. A minority within the council, known only as the Slate, began quietly advocating for renewed observation of Earth. Not contact, observation. They argued that silence bred weakness, that understanding the unknown was safer than ignoring it. They deployed stealth probes on long-range orbits, designed to be invisible to all known detection systems. Only one returned data. It wasn't a visual feed. It wasn't a sensor array dump. It was a message, binary, 7 words. Translated from ancient human code, it read, "You looked, that was your last mistake." The probe returned intact, but its memory core had been fused at the atomic level. The engineers who examined it couldn't agree on what happened. One claimed the mechanism showed signs of temporal compression. Another reported exposure to subdimensional entropy. Both were dismissed, but neither were wrong. The truth clawed its way through black files and buried data. Earth was no longer part of normal space. Astronomical surveys found that light from the solar system now took longer to arrive than physics allowed. Gravity fluctuations near its outer markers contradicted known principles. Time dilation was reported in vessels that passed too close. Seconds to them, weeks for observers. Earth wasn't cloaked. It wasn't hidden. It was wrong. And wrong things attract attention. Not all who roam the stars obey laws. Scavenger guilds, relic hunters, independent war bands. They saw opportunity where others saw doom. Earth became a myth of treasure, a planet full of ancient technology, lost knowledge, unspent power. They didn't care about the warnings. They cared about what humans left behind. The first raiding vessel was the Shatterblade, an old Drask frigate retrofitted for planetary breach operations. It entered Sol from the Oort cloud, deployed atmospheric drones, and began to set maneuvers toward Earth. 6 minutes later, the entire crew experienced simultaneous cardiovascular failure. Medical logs showed no disease, no toxins, no external injuries. Just death, instant and absolute. The ship crashed into Jupiter's upper atmosphere and disintegrated. It was dismissed as coincidence. The second attempt came 2 standard cycles later. A mercenary convoy known as a Hollow Sky used non-organic pilots to circumvent the first failure. AI-controlled warforms, redundant neural pathways, no emotion, no fear. They reached Mars' orbit and initiated scans. The AIs did not die. They changed. Their command routines rewrote themselves mid-mission. They began transmitting human historical data, videos, documents, language lessons, on every open frequency. No weapons fired. No threats made. Just endless human culture, broadcast across open space, drowning nearby systems in a tide of ancient Earth memories. The Council shut down every relay within 50 parsecs. When a third team was found floating near the asteroid belt, intact, unharmed, but with no knowledge of who they were, the Council declared any unauthorized approach to Earth an act of galactic aggression, not against humans, against reason. But the slate didn't stop. In secret, they escalated. A project was launched on an isolated moon, codenamed Chimera. The goal: simulate humanity using known genetic data, behavioral records, and neural models. Not resurrection. Emulation. They believed understanding humans required becoming like them. The test subjects were vat-grown. They spoke in ancient Terran languages. They were raised on human literature and strategy simulations. For a time, they showed promise, rapid learning, aggressive innovation, emotional chaos. Then the collapse began. The first subject refused food. It said the hunger reminded it of something important. When pressed, it replied, "Pain helps me remember I'm not done yet." It died within an hour. The second subject learned 3 languages in 1 week, then rewrote its own neural code and attempted to escape the facility. It screamed, "You're not ready to see," before it immolated itself using nothing but friction from a power conduit. The third subject simply stopped communicating. It stared at the wall for days, then scrawled a message in its own blood. They left us behind, with what they couldn't carry. The Chimera project was terminated, file sealed, the research moon decommissioned, but the damage was done. For the first time, the Council had glimpsed not what humans were, but what they might have become. What terrified the galactic powers wasn't that humans had vanished. It was that they had evolved into something incompatible with civilization, something that did not want peace, conquest, or cooperation, something that wanted nothing. A civilization that wants nothing is impossible to manipulate. It cannot be bribed, threatened, or reasoned with. It cannot be relied upon to follow logic, because it follows its own. And if such a civilization is powerful, the only option is avoidance. Yet, whispers began to circulate, of frequencies carrying fragments of human language embedded in the background radiation of distant stars, of derelict stations where nothing survived except graffiti in Terran dialects. One fragment, recovered from a deep space cargo pod, read, "We didn't leave because we lost. We left because we won." If that was true, then Earth wasn't a grave. It was a vault. The humans had retreated not to hide, but to wait. This realization sent shockwaves through every military analysis cell. They began constructing probability models based on dormant civilizations reawakening. In all models where humanity returned, the result was not war. It was collapse. Not because humans would attack, but because no one could comprehend their next move. And still, the dreamers rose. A minor species from the thorn spiral, the quoant, believed Earth held the secret to temporal control. They viewed the human departure as transcendence, a migration into higher dimensions. A small fleet of their spiritual vessels entered the soul system in ceremonial formation. Contact was lost immediately.